Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Craig Saucier, Assistant Professor of History at Southeastern Louisiana University, and I am the moderator for what promises to be a really engaging panel on the teaching of World War II as part of study abroad programs. And of course, we have the distinction of being in the leadoff spot for this year's meeting. And what we have today are two presentations, three presenters, although two of them will be working together. Each panel will have 20 minutes, and then we will open it up for some questions. For those participants who want to post a question or comment, please do so in the chat box. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Mark Bielski. Dr. Bielski is a professional whose career has spanned literature, academics, journalism, corporate management. He received his doctorate from the University of Birmingham, and in this case, Birmingham in the United Kingdom. He has written professionally as a journalist, as a publisher, as an editor. His work included in the Washington Post. He has published one book. He has just finished a second book, and he is currently working on his third book, all of which deal with the American Civil War. He's also the host of a weekly podcast, History with Mark Bielski, in which he discusses history from ancient to modern times with a series of experts in their particular fields. And since 2006, Dr. Bielski has served as a director and historian at Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours, where he is involved in guiding and lecturing and itinerary design for historical tours that involve, among other things, Second World War in Europe. Today, he's going to speak to us about combining classroom sessions with the actual study abroad programs. And so it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Mark Bielski.
Thank you, Craig. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I'll go right into it. I thought that I would talk about in combining classroom work with study abroad. I figure there are four parts to consider. There's the actual classroom study in advance of the actual tour. There's the tour logistics itself, which are certainly key, making sure everything runs smoothly. And then deciding where you're going to go, considering the theme of the tour, where the tour is going to, what the visits will be. And then after the tour is over, the post-tour work, what kind of summation or test or paper you're going to have to figure out how whoever's going to lead the tour, whatever the professor wants to do, as far as grading it. In classroom study, I really think, as we all know, it's good to start with a syllabus that outlines the course, the reading materials and such. And the one I'm most familiar with is Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion and planning. And the first thing that important is to select reading materials and that are relative to the topic, and then decide how many sessions are needed. I think that without, since this is more of a combination classroom and travel, that you don't need to have as many sessions as you would for a normal course during a semester. It might be 4 to 6 would be sufficient. And occasionally maybe have them in the evening so you can go a little longer and then cover all the material you need to do. So like for Operation Overlord, for example, we would have one session would cover the planning of the invasion, the deception operations. Then the next one might go into the airborne operations and the naval operations, the amphibious landings. And then after that, go into what the key battles were once the Allies landed and where the Germans were and what took place once everybody was on shore. And then just having the last session before the tour might cover the just a summation and what we're going to do on the tour, and then have whatever assignments you had during the coursework. And I think for something like this, the students are all going to be, everybody's going to be interested because they want to be there. It's not going to be like an elective where maybe half the class is only doing it because they have to be there, if that many. everybody who does this is going to want to be there. So there's going to be an excitement building as you get closer to actually leaving for the tour. So for something like this in the classroom work, I thought you could be informal, maybe 60% lecture and 40% class discussion with questions and answers on the reading material, and encourage a question and answering. And I think what happens is as students, the advantages to that is as students get used to talking amongst each other, depending on how big a group you have, 20 to 25, let's say. Maybe they don't know each other, maybe one or two know each other, but by the time you finish your coursework and get ready to leave, they're used to interacting and having discussions. There'll be a lot more comfort. The comfort level will increase materially. And the camaraderie that builds in that classroom, I think, is really going to probably increase tenfold on the tour. Students who didn't know each other before will get to be good friends, and then people who knew each other somewhat will get to even be better friends, and they'll have all these memories to share later on, and with the students at the school when they get back, which will encourage more to do it the following year. I think, the fact that you'll get a group with usually a diverse group. Some will have done a lot of traveling, some will have done some, and some may have, like in our case, may have never been very far from the Gulf Coast. And that diversity really builds up interest, and others want to help the others, and they want to do different things, experience different things together. So that adds to the buildup of excitement. I think in the classroom, it's important to review the itinerary maybe piece by piece. So for example, for a D-Day tour, an Overlord tour, if you start with the planning in England, and then we're in London with Winston Churchill and the Allies, and Eisenhower when he moved down toward the coast at Portsmouth, and the actual invasion itself, just what it entailed, and that goes on discussion throughout the pre-tour work, and everybody gets to know what goes on. And then when they get there, they actually stand where everything took place and get to walk the ground or the beaches or the woods, see the hedgerows and such. And it really adds to the experience. There's nothing, Stephen Ambrose always said that best way to experience history is go where it was made. And I really agree with that. For the class discussions, I thought one thing to do is what are we going to cover pertaining to which locations we're going to be in, and what's the significance of these places? Is it just a little village in Normandy, or is it just a little coastal town in England where a massive invasion took place? Well, they see all this, and they see the photos. They go to a museum, and they see what entailed in building up a massive invasion like this, and then also study what happened on the German side. What were they doing on the other side of the channel while the Allies were getting ready? And it gives them a real perspective of what war was about. In the discussions, I think you can ask students, what are the key events that took place in each, what are the key occurrences that took place here, like San Mary Glees, Omaha Beach, for example, Utah Beach. What about the British beaches? What about Pegasus Bridge? And get students to pick out what they might want to pick one topic per class on each subject. Let's say you take the first one, as I said, the deception plan. I found that students really are interested in that when they hear about all the deception activities that the Allies engaged in to fool the Nazis before we actually launched the invasion, to let them think we were coming somewhere else, let them think we had more forces than we had, more landing craft, etc. And then in that discussion, get students to give their assessment of what they thought about the deception plan, for example. How ingenious was it? Was it successful? Did it fool anybody? And maybe even ask them to research other deception plans that took place in the European theater. There's dozens of them, and they're all interesting, and each one is a story in itself. My favorite one is Operation Mincemeat, which I won't get into because it's not really germane to the subject, but that's I think one of the coolest deceptions that took place in the whole war. and getting those key events, then they know the discussion of those, that it'll show whoever is teaching the course, it'll demonstrate who read what and how much, just what their knowledge is. And I think if you felt that someone was falling behind or not really keeping up with the coursework, rather than threaten them with a grade, I think it's more important to say you're really going to appreciate this more if you delve into the reading material a little bit more, with a little bit more seriousness. I think that'll work. When you talk about the actions, ask them, how did this action come about? Was it a chance encounter? Did they all of a sudden come around the corner and they see a German artillery unit there, or a German armored unit? Or was it planned, like let's plan to take Carentan, for example, something like that? And was it chance or was it planned? Another question that has come up before, like, are classroom tests needed? And I think that for something like this, I really think informality is important in getting everybody to relax and let them feel like this is their deal, that this is their project, this whole, not only the classroom work, but the tour itself. And it gets them to feel that they're all part of this team that's going on, almost like a research expedition. We're going to find out, we're going to really learn what this is all about and what really happened. And they'll feel like when they finish, they'll feel like they could actually teach other students about this, because they'll have learned so much just by being on the ground there. I think sometimes assignments, speaking of tests, I don't know about classroom tests necessarily for the first part, but I think book reviews might be more effective, because if you have 3 pieces of reading material, like I have an old syllabus here, like if you have 3 books, have each student pick one, or have them maybe review each one in the pre-class work. Just a book review, and whoever's teaching the course can decide on what the format's going to be, whether it's a 1-page précis, just a summation of the book, or an actual book review like you might read in a magazine, or a book review with a formal outline and summation and conclusion, etc. I think that would be more effective, because it would, than a test, because it would give them a chance to figure that, like, they make a commitment by having to read more of the material and having to offer an analysis, and it takes the pressure off, and it helps build up the excitement. I'm very keen on building up the excitement before the tour, and it'll really kick in when they get there. One thing I think is also important, is more of a administrative thing, is to review the rules and regulations before departure. What are the rules? Like paying attention to local customs. Remember, you're not in the United States anymore. Letting them know what the culture is in England and France in this case, or wherever you're going to go. Just what the monetary exchange is. Obviously, it's different for England than it is for France. The final review of the rules and regulations, and that, of course, is up to the institution, the college or university. One may be more strict than another, and of course, you got to remember that, I'm sure we all do, that these are adults. So they're university students, so they're adults. But then, of course, as being part of the university, there's some responsibility on the institution's part too. On the tour logistics, a decision of should there be a group flight? If for example, from Southeastern, everybody could leave from New Orleans, that's fairly convenient. But if it's a school that students are coming from all over, they may want to make their own. Or do you want to include the group flight in the cost of the tour? That's something to consider. And where to meet once you get over there. If it's a group flight, that's easy. Because you land in London, for example, everybody's together. You'll have prearranged, hopefully you would use a tour operator because they have all the contacts and know where to go and how to arrange transportation on the ground, et cetera. That's Steve and Ambrose. That's what we do, the logistics people. And then arrange for transport to the hotel rather than have students meet at the hotel. Another important thing is you don't want to lose anybody right at the start of the tour. So a group flight might be the best idea. Everybody gets on the plane together, everybody gets off the plane together. Then decide on, going back to, part of the logistics is level of accommodations. For students, 2 or 3 star, maybe 2 stars is sufficient, because in a lot of cases it's going to be nicer than what they were living in the dorm or a shared apartment off campus. In many cases, like a Ibis hotel in Europe, they're clean and the services are good and such. And then what are the rooming setups going to be? Pairing up the males and females, and how many per room, 2 to 3. And then going out, when they're going to go out most every night as soon as they can, as soon as they finish dinner. Encourage them to go out and no fewer than 2 people in pairs, no matter where you are. Hopefully more in groups of more than 2. And then meals. How many meals do you want? Breakfast is almost always included. But do you want to include lunches occasionally in places, or how many dinners do you want to include? Things like that to consider. And I also think it's important to encourage them to try new cuisines. Don't let everybody just bolt to Popeyes. And I found actually that the students really want to try new things. Everything from tripe in France to different foods and everything. They don't want to go over there and eat American food, which is always comforting. And just they see different dining habits in Europe, like in France, the cafe culture, just little things like that. And I think they really tend to get into that type of thing. On the actual visits, once you get over there, mapping out a clear itinerary, and I think once you're there, to make it still part of the learning experience, make it academic, assign individual students at specific sites where they can give a brief presentation. For example, if you're at Pegasus Bridge, maybe 2 students can give maybe a 5-minute presentation about what happened there, and that'll get them used to it. And you start with that day 1, and it gets to be more of a competition where they all want to do better than the other. And then encourage discussions at dinner, at breakfast. I think it's important to give a breakfast briefing every day, let them know where we're going and when and what time we'll be back, and et cetera. And then and also schedule a final dinner at the end of the tour. For the post-tour, once you get back to the States, I think a paper would be better than a test. Maybe if it's undergraduate, maybe a 10-page paper, whether the teacher wants to assign a paper, the topic, or the students can pick it, as long as it's relative to the tour. And then another thing I think is important is to grade on participation. It'll encourage students to be part of the group, and if you had maybe 20% of the grade on participation, that would be, of course, be up to the teacher, however they want to, how much weight they want to put on that. But that's basically it. The 4 parts: the classroom study, the tour logistics, the itinerary, where you're going to visit, and then the post-tour work, the actual assignment that they can work for their grade on. So that's it. I'd look forward to answer any questions anybody has when we get to that session.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was really informative, and I'm sorry I didn't hear all that before I went on my first study abroad tour a number of years ago. Our second and third speakers this afternoon, are Dr. Paul Wilson and Dr. Kurt Stiegler. Dr. Paul Wilson is a professor of history at Nicholls State University. He received his doctorate from Mississippi State University. He has published widely in 20th century America and he is the author of Himmler's Cavalry, the Equestrian SS, 1930 to 1945. Since 2009, he has served as the department head of the Department of History and Geography at Nicholls State, and since 2010, he is the Mac Thomas Nolan Endowed Professor of History. Dr. Wilson has taught extensively about Hitler and the Third Reich, about the Second World War, about the Holocaust, D-Day, the Battle for Normandy. And he's taught not only for Nicholls, but also with the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Dr. Wilson will be joined by his colleague, Dr. Kurt Stiegler. And Dr. Stiegler received his PhD from Texas A&M. And since 2000, Dr. Stiegler has been an assistant professor of history at Nicholls State, where he teaches widely on American foreign policy, American military history, 20th century Europe and America, and modern Asia. For several years, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Stiegler have been handling the Normandy Academy and the Student Learning Academy with the World War II Museum in New Orleans. Both of these are immersive and in-depth summer educational programs for high school students and college students. What they'll be doing this afternoon is focusing more on the Normandy Academy in particular, and how they used the trip to teach not only the history of the Second World War, but also leadership skills. And so once again, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paul Wilson and Dr. Kurt Stiegler.
Thank you. Kurt, is your microphone on? Dr.
Yes.
Stiegler?
Yes, I can hear you.
Decided to do, okay, Kurt, what we've decided to do is sort of divide this presentation. I'll take the first part, a broad overview of the program, and Dr. Stiegler will talk about some of the specific sort of examples of, I guess, what the College of Education would call experiential learning, like on the ground at several sites in Normandy. So I do have a PowerPoint. I don't know that it's important, but I do have a PowerPoint. It starts off with some of the images. Just a little background. This is called the Normandy Academy. It's a program that's sponsored by the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Several years ago, about 6 years ago, we were contacted by the museum to help with this program. And Nicholls is the university that provides college credit, as well as the historians that travel with all of the participants on this program. It has grown dramatically since we were first involved. And I'm not saying it's necessarily because of us, because World War II Museum does most of the recruiting for this. We now, last year, we were planning to offer 3 trips. We used to have 1 trip with high school and college students, and now it's divided into a high school cohort and a college cohort. Last time we actually had 2 groups of college students who were preparing to go before 2020 hit us all with the pandemic. But the goal of this program is certainly educational. And I don't want to repeat some of the things that Mark does, because I think there's a lot of similarities with these travel programs. But our goal is to turn these students, or at least to get these students to think in different ways. Some of them have come to us having watched some World War II films, played some of the video games online, and they have sort of a basic knowledge of World War II, and we want to increase the sort of depth and broad scope of their knowledge of World War II, and also get them to consider a number of issues that Allied commanders faced, as well as soldiers on the ground, and the need for these soldiers to have the training and preparation so that they can make wise decisions immediately to protect themselves and those around them. So the ultimate goal is sort of to teach them World War II history, but to turn them into, to let them know that in some capacity in the future, they're going to be in a leadership position, in some capacity, and they're going to have to become decision makers and problem solvers. So that's a big part of the experience. The overall program itself begins in the spring. It's a trip that occurs in the summer, usually June or July, or June and July, depending on the number of trips we take. It begins over the spring when students are provided a number of reading materials where they have to do preparatory reading, and we enroll them in an online class at Nicholls and have them discuss readings, submit answers to various sort of guiding questions that they may have. I have an example of some of that where I have it on the PowerPoint, where sort of we're trying to teach them about a leadership trait, about the importance of commitment and communication, and the importance of delegating authority. And so we have them read a selection from Martin Gilbert's book on D-Day, background to the decision-making and the planning involved, as well as a section on Eisenhower's crusade in Europe, so that they can get an idea of the way Eisenhower approached decisions and how he managed, you know, some of those, as we all know, difficult personalities he had to deal with. So we get them to think about these things, and they often aren't aware of these sort of specific issues that the Allied High Command had to deal with, and that Eisenhower himself had to deal with. So we do background reading, then we take them to New Orleans. They come to New Orleans for approximately 3 days, put them in a hotel in New Orleans, and sort of immerse them in the holdings of the National World War II Museum. And what we do, we take them to some of the exhibits, discuss some of the exhibits, discuss some of the background to World War II. That's where we really begin to teach sort of a more comprehensive understanding of World War II, so we can focus on Normandy a little later. We do discussions of Eisenhower, his background and his leadership style. We do discussions of all sorts of things. We'll talk about the campaign in North Africa, U.S. involvement in World War II. I do a background on Nazi Germany because that's sort of my specialty there. So we have, you know, and Kurt does similar things where we take the specialties that we have and we do these little mini lectures over there to the students. They watch the film there, Beyond All Borders. They go behind the scenes to look at some of the holdings that the World War II Museum has that they just haven't put on display or used to be on display. So we like to, and they do love to hold these weapons, particularly the German weapons. So they have fun seeing what's warehoused over there. Actually, Kurt and I have fun doing that as well. You know, it's not like we have these things at Nicholls, so it's fun for us as well. And from New Orleans, we do some leadership scenarios that Dr. Stiegler is going to talk about in a little more detail, where we assign students certain roles to play in the decision-making process of a particular campaign, or a particular battle, or an overall aspect of World War II. So it gets them a chance to explore the role of leadership in battle, leadership in decision, and the importance of decision making prior to the arrival in Normandy. We end up flying out to Normandy. We arrive in Paris, do a quick little tour of Paris. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time to spend in Paris because the focus is on Normandy. And then we hop on a bus and head to Normandy. Initially, what we used to do was, you know, hit the beaches quickly. We'd arrive in Normandy and hit the beaches, but I think we realized that everyone is incredibly tired, so we kind of relax at the hotel. For the first couple of years, we stayed in Bayeux, where the Bayeux Tapestry is. Fortunately, the British fortunately didn't destroy it, so it has nice cathedrals there and sights to see. And I think recently they moved to Caen, nearby Caen, which is a much larger city that the British took care of, so it's entirely rebuilt. And from there, we go to just various sites around there. We go to all of the beaches, especially, of course, the American beaches, Omaha in particular, Utah, but we take them to Pegasus Bridge. We sort of start from the beginning. Pegasus Bridge, take them to St. Mary Glees, Brecourt Manor, where they're given a little discussion by the owner of that manor there, who was a child when that occurred. I think some of you may be familiar with that scene, Winters in Band of Brothers, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment. And we go to various other sites, chateaus, different sites. We take them into the hedgerow territory, and so they get to see what a French hedgerow is compared to what the British have, or what we may have in our landscaping. And we end up with the final battle, the closing of the Falaise Gap at Montomel. And finally, we go back to Omaha Beach to the American Cemetery there. So we see a variety of sites. And at each of these sites, we have museum curators over there who explain things. And we do as well. We talk about aspects of these battles, explain what's going on. And we have little mini sort of leadership scenarios that occur at these sites. And so the students are very much involved. They have to have done some research. They have to take a side. You know, for instance, at Omaha, should the bombing raids have been have been parallel rather than perpendicular at Omaha Beach. And we compare it to Utah Beach, bombing raids at Utah Beach. So we get students to take a side. They take an active role and they have to defend their position in a manner that's other Allied leaders defended, you know, the use of paratroopers. So the goal, of course, for these students is to think a little more clearly and effectively about the meaning of World War II. We want them to understand these battles in particular. We have them write, so they do develop writing skills, critical thinking skills. Everybody says, I know critical thinking skills are sort of overused. And part of it is just for them to experience history, as Mark pointed out. You want to be where history is created. You want to go to Omaha Beach, take off your shoes and get, that's sacred ground for us, and get some of that sand in between your toes and think about it. Walk the beach at low tide. Look at it at high tide, you know, at low tide, at high tide, all of this to see what the Allied soldier has actually had to face. And those things are important, I think, for students. And part of it, the students overwhelmingly enjoy this trip. We keep them busy throughout the day. And we try to provide some sort of opportunities for them to explore the city they're in Bayou, where they can just walk around. Mark mentioned the cafe scene, cafe culture. It's kind of interesting to see some of these students, college students and high school students who will immerse themselves in French culture, and by the fifth day, sixth day in France, they're sitting in cafes like the locals. And I think that's part of the learning process, where they're getting to appreciate the culture of this region within France. And it's a region that is very hospitable to Americans and travelers. You know, we're the basis of, we're their economic basis there. So we're essential for them. I'm not sure what happened to Normandy this year economically, since so many people were unable to take trips there. We wrap this up with a sort of a journal reflection on everything, and where they sum up their experiences and the knowledge they have learned, and talk about the legacy of the Normandy campaign, as well as the legacy of World War II. So that's sort of a broad overview. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Stiegler, who has been going recently. I haven't gone the last 2 years. He's been going recently and working really closely with a number of these students on the Normandy campaign, particularly with the college students. He's our military historian. Dr. Stiegler?
Thanks, Paul. This is what we do with the consortium with the D-Day Museum people, the National World War II Museum, this is a battlefield tour. And in my view, there are 5 core elements to a battlefield tour, broader Normandy battlefield. First, you need to establish the broader political and military context for the students. Many of them do have a great interest in military history. Some of these kids can name the caliber, the velocity of every weapon on both sides, but we want them to understand the broader political and military context. Next, we want to establish, through the readings, through the seminars we hold, and the discussion on the battlefields, to establish a narrative of the campaign and battle, and understand the mission of the commanders and the troops and the difficulties to be overcome. Third, we want to place the tour participants on the battlefield. That's, of course, in Normandy, where they can experience the texture of the battle and imagine the events of the past and place themselves in the position of the troops. I tell the kids, buy one of those little British military compasses at one of the first gift shops we show up at, because that's what they're using at the time. You can look at the grid court, you know, where you are geographically is very important, because we don't want them to get lost, sort of like, oh, we're on the bus, where are we driving? East, west, you think. And so that's very important to me, this geography. And fourth, to understand the importance and legacy of the battle and the meaning of the war. Last, these battlefield tours should evoke a sense of pilgrimage and commemoration. The battlefields were sites of deadly combat, where thousands were wounded and killed, and the sacrifice should be remembered and honored. And one of the things, let me point this out, this is sort of fortunate on one of the trips I made, a Placemat Map, French on one side, English on the other, French on one side, English on the other. And I would hold this up in the bus and bring it with me, just put it, and point out where we are. It's got all the place names listed from east to west, the beach names on one side, débarquement on Normandy, and this is really useful because you don't have to have people just looking at the computer, or you just hold it up, explain, walk around. We are at our Romanche. This is in relation where to Long-sur-Mer, the battery here, French, the dispositions of the troops. So this came in very handy. I picked this up in I think the first tour, 2016, that I did. So to have to geographically place, have them knowledgeable about a little history of Normandy, where they are in relation to why these beaches were selected, why the Americans are landing in the West. And it's simple that the Americans landed in the West because that's where they were placed as far as their troop accommodations on the other side of the English Channel. British were already, and the Americans on the West. It's simple. Go straight across the channel from the West to East. Some of the sites, Paul mentioned many of the sites we visited, and some of the individuals, some of the people we met there. Of course, in Bayeux, you have the tapestry, you have the beautiful museum there, which shows the invasion. Note that Eisenhower was born on the anniversary of the Battle of Hastings. People didn't know that. A little thing I like to add with the students. Eisenhower was born on the anniversary of the Battle of Hastings, October, was it 14th? So then you got the memorial in Caen, which is beautiful. Colette Matin, the French resistance fighter. I'm sure some of y'all have met her. She's a marvelous human being, and she explains what it's like as a teenage girl to be part of this campaign. And she's an intel operative with her school books, taking down notes about deployments of German troops active in the area. She sees them from eating her lunch in the park. So, of course, to me, one of the most chilling places you go is to Ardennes Abbey. Ardennes Abbey, where Kurt Meyer and the SS, the massacre, the atrocity of it's a very chilling spot. It's just, every time I go there, it just, you can feel the hackles rise and the evil present there to this day. Our Romanche cinema is a tremendous cinema that we've used. We visit the various cemeteries, the British, the US, La Combe German Cemetery, Pointe-du-Hoc, where I explained to them that Hoc is actually a pre-Celtic word. Pointe is French, but Hoc is a pre-Celtic word. It shows you the persistence of place names and the depth of history in Normandy. It means high place in pre-Celtic language. And of course, the American landing beaches, British landing beaches, the British people there, the tour guides at Pegasus Bridge are people that are absolutely of great help, indispensable, as are the various French people we've dealt with. Note that getting to the grading and course structure, we have elements of pre-course readings, assignments submitted, reading assignments submitted before travel. Then we have a series of, based upon research that we tell the students where to research, how to research. We have three reports for the students, meaning an oral report at the battlefield site. And we have chosen, I've chosen for various reasons, Saint-Marc-Église, Lafayette Bridge. One student will report on the American side. One student will report on the German side. The third will talk about the results of the action and assess the performance of the two sides. So we split things up. And then the next time, it depends on how many students we have, how many reports we have given. At Omaha Beach, same thing. German side, Allied side, American side, and finally how the U.S. overcame the German defenses, an assessment of the battle. And last time we used also Falaise Gap, Montomel, the great museum there, and reports. So each student at one time or another will do the German role, the Allied role, and the results, significance, legacy of the battle. So what we hope that the students gather by the end of all this is Eisenhower and Bradley and Montgomery, all the people in the D-Day leadership, they stress the importance of preparation and training in achieving battlefield success and of course, in larger success in life. Command responsibility. We hope the students learn about command responsibility and hierarchy of command. Communication, role of communication of what the troops are going to do. What's your role in this, in the upcoming battle? And how to select leadership, how to select leaders around you. Eisenhower thought that after the war, the character was the most important determinant. He said that character, you can be as smart as a whip. You can have the calculated brain, but character to him determined your work ethics. It determined how you got along with your colleagues. It determined your approach to things. And so character, judgment, loyalty, and the students at the end, they would write for about 40% of the grade, would write a journal in which they would give their impressions of Normandy, of the battlefields, of the trip itself, of France, and the legacy of the battle, what they thought of the battle now as they hit after the trip. And really, again, the texture of the battlefield is absolutely vital. You can read about it, but you have to be on site. You have to walk the beaches. You have to walk and through the fortifications. You have to be at Ardennes Abbey, and you have to be on site. So it looks like we're at 4:40.
Okay. Yeah, perfect time. Thank you very much, Dr. Stiegler and Dr. Wilson.
German thoroughness.
Awesome display.
There's a Stiegler at the German cemetery. There's a Stiegler buried at the German cemetery.
The flag of Guillaume le Conquérant. The Norman flag here. I picked up one of those.
Well, okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for these wonderful presentations. We're now going to open up the floor, so to speak, for any kind of questions. So if you have questions or you want to post a comment, please go ahead and do so in the chat box. And in the meantime, I'd like to pose a question to all of you. And this might just be the inbred cynicism in me, but I was kind of curious as to the level of seriousness of the students and their preparation. Dr. Wilson mentioned that sometimes the preparation is sort of restricted to just a couple of World War II movies, so they know a little bit about guns and things. But I'm wondering how much the experience transforms them, especially in their level of seriousness. They go, they're just kids, but do they walk away from this experience with just a real powerful appreciation of what the men did in Normandy?
Actually, well, Mark, why don't you go? You were first to start. Let's go.
That is a good question, because as I said, they all want to be there because it's not an elective that they have to take. And for some, it's a financial sacrifice. I know students have even taken out loans to do those tours. So they do want to be there. And most of them are they do the pre-reading and prepare for it pretty well. And there's always the different 3 levels of preparation, but it seems like all of them are very enthused and infused with knowledge and excitement about the history they've learned. It builds as they're on the tour. So I think it really works. I think there's an interest level that builds throughout.
Okay, I think in terms of the level of knowledge, they certainly come away transformed. I think there's a universal appreciation for what Americans and others accomplished at Normandy and in World War II. They certainly, at least from all the journals that I've read and students in my class and just discussions with participants. In fact, some of the participants go on to study public history in graduate school. One of the participants who came with me on a trip ended up serving on the board of the Regional Military Museum in Houma, Louisiana, and actually designed their D-Day exhibit there. So it was very much a transformative experience for him. So I think in terms of the level of preparation, unfortunately, I think historians disparage some of the knowledge of people who are interested in the nuts and bolts of military history, that is militaria. They're interested in militaria. And certainly we have students who can tell you all the differences between an MG-34 and an MG-42 and tell you all these little things that I just don't know, you know, the mechanics of some of these tanks. They'll tell you all these little details. Not as many come with the sort of big, broad picture of the importance of World War II, how we got involved, why we chose Normandy. They may know a couple of details about some deception campaigns. They know a little bit about Patton. They've all seen The Longest Day, but they end up learning a great deal more, so much more than when they started this campaign. Although I've had some students who are really quite knowledgeable about World War II, incredibly well read. A couple of foreign boys from Wisconsin that I can remember who were just super sharp and smart, and seem to absorb the library, that the local library's holdings on World War II. But our students come from all across the country, and it's very much a diverse group. That's something that the World War II Museum wants. So, Kurt, what are your experiences with it?
I think the students, to me, as we visit the various cemeteries, the British cemetery in Bayeux, and you see the inscriptions, and you see some of the young men and women, they're sobbing. You know, they're shaken by the British allow inscriptions on the gravestones, brief inscriptions by the families themselves about the loss of the son, the daughter in some cases. And one of the monuments, there's a group of British Catholic nuns that were killed by a stray shell blast, nurses. Point that out to them, and then people are just shaken by that. And then at the end, it's just the experience and you see the reaction of the students. As we have the students, we bring, every student places a rose on a cross in the American cemetery. Yeah, we provide roses, and each student walks around, and they're allowed to place a rose and say a little prayer, commemoration to a gravesite. And it's really, you see the response of the kids and how shaken some of them are. Some of them, they're comforting each other because
they're the same age as some of those soldiers there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, exactly. And so I think they learn about, in Normandy, they learn about the best and worst of humanity. And that's a valuable lesson to acquire at a young age. You see the best and worst of humanity.
And sometimes we have students do a little research on some of the people who are buried at the American cemetery, and they talk about that individual when we visit the grave site. And also we talk about the unknown soldiers who are buried there. That's also a moving experience for them. And I think that really is, probably the American cemetery is really the most moving part of that trip for those students. It brings the meaning of the war together and the importance of sacrifice and the sacrifice that prior Americans had to make. And
I might add a couple of things very similar to what y'all were talking about. One thing I have done many times is going to the Stick 66 Memorial. I will bring a copy of Lieutenant Meehan's letter to his wife, which is kind of touching, very well written. And I'll ask one of the young ladies in the group to read it. And there's not a dry eye in the whole group when she's finished. I don't know if you are familiar with that letter that he wrote where they took off.
I'm not familiar. I need to look that up because I'm not familiar with it. I need to get my hands on that.
Yeah, it's very worthwhile.
Well, that's a very wonderful note on which to bring this panel to an end. We have just exceeded our time limit by just slightly a bit. I have a little German in me as well. So I want to thank everyone for participating for the panel and thank the speakers. It's a wonderful job, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, Craig.
Thanks.